Today I'm going to be talking about the unseen extract for Paper 2, Section A of the A-Level Political and Social Protest paper. And as you can see from this first slide, we're going to be talking about the Winslow Boy, which is an extract from a play that came up in this paper about 5 years ago. The aim of this video is therefore to give A-Level students a good revision tool in order to remind them how to approach the unseen extract task, and also to, again, analyse an extract in order to make those connections to the genre of political and social protest. So the aims of this video are relatively straightforward in the sense that we're going to first remind ourselves what the task and the question is, because the question is always the same. At the top of the extract, the exam board will write for you what I call the synopsis box, which always contains important information to contextualise the extract in order to analyse it. We're then going to analyse the extract while reading, and in so doing, connecting the genre to the extract. So this task is really all about connecting political and social protest elements to something that you've not read before. And then the video is going to finish by showing you an example of what a good response looks like. So if we think about the question is always going to be the same. It's here on the left-hand side. And AQA, of course, love the word significance. And it's a word really which is to do with you making a judgment as a reader as to what you want to talk about in your essay. So remember, your essay is a discussion with the examiner. It's for you to decide as the writer of that discussion, so to speak, as to what it is you want to talk about. The task is therefore relatively straightforward, and the more you practice this, the quicker at it you become, because it almost becomes second nature. There's no surprises. It's always the same approach, which is the first thing, obviously, is to read the synopsis box and then the extract, maybe multiple times. Highlight the extract and the synopsis box accordingly to help you go forward in terms of your analysis. And when you're writing that essay, when you're entering into that discussion with the examiner, to be able to make reference to some of the elements of political and social protest writing, because essentially this is a connection task. You're connecting the genre that you have studied all year, maybe longer, to something that you've not read before. So in this case, this was the synopsis box. So like I said, this was a question that came up about 5-6 years ago. And this is what is printed at the top of a student's extract. The reason why the exam board writes this for you is because they're trying to make it easier, really. They know, of course, that you've not read this extract before, and they understand that this is a pressurized environment because it's an exam, it's your A-level, it's what you've been working 2 years for. And many of you will want to go into higher education, so everybody knows how important this exam is. So in order to help you, they've written a little bit of a summary for you in order to help you go forward and to potentially be on the right lines when you're writing your response. So what I always get my students to do, even before they've read the extract, is to just look at the synopsis box, as you can see here on the screen, and take a highlighter or a pen and circle in terms of what they regard to be significant to help them with interpreting the extract. It's a danger and it's a mistake, I think, to put pen to paper before you've really understood what the main lines of inquiry are. So this is, of course, to help with that. So you can pause the video now and have a go at working out what the significant things are in this synopsis box, or you can continue watching and we can go through what I have picked out. So in your pursuit of looking for clues, students will regularly highlight the following details, and you can see I've also given some annotations around the outside. We're already beginning to connect with the genre of political and social protest when we're talking about government, when we're talking about the pursuit of justice, powerful institutions, repression, voicelessness, unfairness. Clearly, our annotations here show that we're already beginning to connect the genre to the extract. So dates are often important. It tells us if this is historical or contemporary or Victorian or romantic. It can often give us some eras of English. And of course, a main contextual point here is the fact that we have the First World War mentioned. So this is a play that takes place just before the First World War. So we have to ask ourselves the question, what is the role of leadership and government in these kind of moments? What would you expect your represented government to be talking about if this is a challenge that the country is facing? This extract is all about a young naval cadet called Ronnie. And of course, when you have that phrase, young naval cadet, you know that children or teenagers are often represented in this kind of genre because they represent innocence. And if you're thinking about William Blake, for example, we know that children are often used as devices in William Blake's poetry to show how the world of experience or the world of adulthood can corrupt that world of innocence and the kind of the sacrosanct nature of innocence. So in this case, we have another child, really, a 14-year-old, facing some challenges regarding the society that he is living in because of this alleged crime. Now, the crime has been theft. So he has been accused of stealing a relatively small amount of money called a 5-bob postal order from the Royal Navy. And of course, the fact that we have here wrongly accused means that we have the themes of unfairness and injustice coming through. So essentially, this extract is in part about a family's campaign in order to either fight for the truth or just to exercise democratic rights, which you have in a democracy, such as in the UK, in terms of things like a fair trial, freedom of speech, and so on. So when we're talking about fight to clear Ronnie's name, we're talking about a pursuit, the pursuit of justice. And in so doing, the family, particularly Catherine, is keen on exercising those democratic rights. Whenever you have reference to newspapers, you're going to have reference there to the media. And the media, as some of us might know today, is still a very powerful force in a country because the media might have political intent. It will appeal to a political mindset because each newspaper tends to have a political kind of supporter in mind, left wing, right wing, and so on. So whenever you have national newspapers, we're talking here about the powerful institution of the media, but also we all have in this extract Parliament and the Appeal Court representing, of course, the judiciary as well as elected government. So all of those in pink there are examples of powerful institutions that have a large degree of national influence. For those of you that have studied A Doll's House, this might remind you of that play because the similarity between both A Doll's House and this extract is the fact that they both take place in a family home and more specifically within one room. And of course, that makes us remember that both A Doll's House and this play, at least this extract, is representing the domestic sphere and how personal relationships can be affected by a societal expectation. So in this case, John and Catherine's engagement, their personal relationship, is beginning to crack slightly because of Catherine's insistence and determination to fight for Ronnie's innocence or just to exercise his democratic rights. Of course, Ronnie in this extract is also asleep in the same room, representing the fact that he is voiceless. He is unable to defend himself in John and Catherine's conversation because he is voiceless. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So that immediately helps us think about what the crux of this extract is. It's about this young boy, this teenager, 14-year-old, who has been wrongly accused of theft by a powerful institution like the Navy, and his sister Catherine and her fiancé John, or more so Catherine really, are determined to make sure that Ronnie gets a fair deal in terms of the justice system, the judiciary, the courts, the government, and so on. So the context box here is immediately starting to kind of direct us into the right line of inquiry. So in order to save time, I'm not going to read the extract because the extract is available, and chances are if you are watching this video, you've already got the extract in front of you. But what I have done is I have color-coded some annotations down the side in order to think about how this extract may already begin to connect with the genre of political and social protest writing. So the extract begins with John's talking about having a practical mind. And of course, it reinforces this old-fashioned stereotype of men being practical and logically minded compared to women. And some students say that this is also quite patronising. He's basically saying that Catherine is letting her heart rule her head, and it's a man's responsibility to make sure that logic is followed and common sense is followed. So he's basically saying, I have a practical mind, Catherine, you do not. You can tell from Catherine's tone in green there, I'm ready to face it, John. It means that she has a defensive and empowered tone. And a lot of students and a lot of readers or members of the audience actually find that quite kind of courageous of her. And courage, of course, is another aspect of this genre. She's willing to confront John's ideas rather than being in denial. It's always interesting to look at pronouns. John says, I think you should consider very carefully what you do next regarding this campaign. And Catherine replies with we, suggesting that there is a difference here, perhaps, in how they see themselves in this campaign. Catherine perhaps naively believes John is on her side, whereas John perhaps is remaining slightly more distant and is putting all of the pressure on Catherine to sort it out. Of course, later on it's revealed that John is concerned that this case is having a detrimental impact on the Winslow family name, and he's feeling a bit embarrassed because of jokes that are being made about him in terms of harming perhaps his reputation and his respectability. Again, the interrogative, what is the next step, suggests here in blue that Catherine is not letting John just make comments. She's putting him on the spot and expects him to provide some answers. In pink here, her short sentences, no, I should welcome it, show that she has a degree of resistance and resilience. And as we said before, she's not hiding from the issue. And John at the bottom here in grey reminds us of the crime, the fact that he pinches or doesn't pinch a 5-bob postal order, which represents a relatively trivial and small amount of money. Let's say it represents £5. £5 in the Navy, of course, a very powerful organisation like the Navy, is a very small amount of money. So it's quite odd and quite bizarre why the Navy have pursued Ronnie in this way. Maybe the main reason they have done so is because he's a child and they believe that they can win the case because of his innocence and perhaps ease of any kind of exploitation. It also reminds us here at the bottom that John is not sure whether Ronnie committed the crime or not. So again, usually what would happen is a loved one would say, they didn't do it. I'm sure of it. They didn't do it, because it's part of that support that they offer. But in this case, it's not happening. So John's potential brother-in-law, he's not basically saying he's innocent or guilty. He's saying it could be either. So he's not presenting the same kind of support that Catherine is to Ronnie. Moving on to the next section, we get reference in grey here to John's father being a diehard and other figures of rank, such as admirals, who represent the authority figures of this extract and the elite, who perhaps because of their experience and because of the length of service and their title enables them to shape societal values relatively easily. In yellow here, this section, and again, I wouldn't expect students to copy all of this out in an exam because it would be too much. But you might want to pick at this yellow section to remind us and to remind readers of the extent to which this court case or this campaign has really escalated into the higher echelons of the British system in terms of justice and truth. So not only have they had multiple cases, so they've had 2 inquiries and an appeal, as well as a petition of rights case. They've also now gone to the House of Commons, representing, of course, government and elected ministers. And they've also spent time discussing this case as well. So they've really exhausted, or they are beginning to exhaust, all the possible avenues that somebody can take in the UK to fight for the truth and justice. In green here, from John's language, we can see that the interrogatives where he asks her twice, surely that's enough, means that he's kind of had enough of this now. And he believes that they've had a good bite of the apple. They've maybe wasted the time of enough people. And now it's time for the government to be debating more serious issues, which we'll discuss in a second. He uses the adverb surely twice, meaning that he's trying to persuade her to give it up. Perhaps for selfish reasons, perhaps he's concerned about his own name and his own reputation, and he doesn't want to be laughed at by his friends, maybe. In blue here, we are reminded, of course, in terms of the stage methods and the dramatic methods here for AO2, that ironically, I suppose, the character that they are spending the whole extract talking about is actually on stage, but he's asleep. And while he is asleep, he doesn't, of course, have a voice. And that could also be a metaphor, perhaps, for the way in which Ronnie doesn't have a voice in these far larger, far more powerful institutions, such as the appeal court, the media, or the government. And of course, while he's asleep, John says he won't mind. So he's effectively speaking for somebody else. Ronnie cannot verbally defend himself here. So in terms of staging, I think that's quite an important method that is used here by Rattigan in terms of showing Ronnie's kind of powerlessness. Finally, on this slide, Catherine, it's almost like a bit of an epiphany here, a bit of a climax. We assume maybe to begin with that Catherine thinks that Ronnie could never have done this crime, because that's what relatives think. Relatives hardly ever will believe you've done the wrong thing. They're your support network at the end of the day. But Catherine says here in this pink section, I'm not sure he didn't do it. So that changes things. So Catherine's campaign is not so much concerned with getting to Ronnie's innocence, because even she isn't sure whether that's going to be the result. She's therefore more interested in making sure that Ronnie is able to use the powerful institutions of the land, such as ministers, such as an elected government that is supposed to represent the electorate or the public, their constituents, or the appeal courts, making sure that people have the right to use those organisations if they need to. Otherwise, what are they there for? There's no point in having an appeal court if it's not there to serve ordinary people. So that's really what this message of the extract is. The appeal court, the government, are all there to serve all of us. And if those appeal court doors are locked, what's the point of it? It clearly isn't justice for all, but instead it's justice for those that can pay for it, or justice for those that are well known or have particular people in that organisation, such as nepotism, for example. So it's almost a comment here Catherine is making on being able to use these powerful organisations in order to get to the truth, whatever that might be, but also to exercise your democratic rights. In this section, we get a good understanding of what's happening in the country at large. So in the red section here, this is all, of course, social and historical context, because it helps us understand why John might say the things that he says. So in his opinion, Catherine should not be distracting our elected government from much more important issues, which may have far-reaching ramifications to a wider society, as of course World War I did, which is European wars, there's problems in Ireland, there's a coal strike. So this is not a society where everything is in harmony, or this is not a society where there's equilibrium. This is a society that's entering quite a tumultuous political time, as was the case in around the beginning of the 20th century, not just with the First World War, but also the Second World War that followed afterwards. So in John's mind, this is much more serious. This is what our elected government should be talking about, not, as he says, a 14-year-old kid that stole a 5-bob postal order. So this triviality juxtaposed with this kind of ominous war and other issues on the horizon. Of course, in green there, the word kid reinforces Ronnie's innocence, but also perhaps John's patronising tone. Which is also shown in the yellow here, those long, noble words. Very much, if you've again studied The Doll's House, it reminds me a little bit of Helmer, of how he will call Nora a child in that, almost kind of doing away with any sense of substance that she has, when actually she is speaking with a lot of substance. He just doesn't want to see that. So Catherine reinforces in the pink section here that all she cares about really is that she wants to make sure that government departments are there to serve the people that elect them, in keeping with a fundamental human rights framework, really, and making sure that if there has been incompetence on a government level, that it's known about, because they are elected governments, and therefore, if there is any incompetence, that is a form of injustice and unfairness, and therefore ordinary citizens should know about it because it's their government too. You can see in blue here, Catherine's responses become, again, very short in the middle. Yes, it does. Again, suggesting that she has a degree of inner strength here and an inner sense of resistance. And at the bottom in grey, this could show Catherine's naivety, in the sense that she believes that the government is set up perhaps to discuss matters like this. Of course, if the government was to spend hours and hours in the House of Commons talking about individual cases like this, a lot of other things would have to be kind of not spoken about. So maybe Catherine is quite naive to think that government is about discussing individual cases. Not necessarily the case. That's why you have the appeal courts and the judiciary in order to make those decisions on individual cases, rather than using up governmental time, if it's not, for example, in the public's interest. The last bit of the extract, here we have, again, because this is dialogue, of course, this is a prose drama. It's not written in verse, for example, like a Shakespeare play. It means that this play is supposed to represent spontaneous speech. So you have a lot of hyphens, for example, here to show maybe interruptions, but also hesitations, which is often what we use when we're speaking, spontaneously using spoken discourse. John, of course, is very concerned that the Winslow name is being made a bit of a laughing stock, and he doesn't really want to be associated with that. He wants this campaign to be put to rest because he doesn't want to be associated with anybody that's a bit maybe eccentric like Catherine, who just won't give up. And in the yellow section, John says, I have people coming up to me all the time saying, are you marrying that Catherine girl, that Winslow girl? You better be careful because otherwise she might be starting to accuse you of things. So John is very much motivated by a family name and also lineage, I think. And he doesn't want to be associated with a woman who just won't give up over a relatively trivial campaign. Again, it's Catherine's determination and her tenacity which probably makes her a much nicer character, or a much better or a much more likeable character than John. A lot of students don't like John because they see him as representing a patronising patriarchal control, whereas Catherine is not only standing up to these large bodies like the appeal court and the media and the government, but she's also standing up to her fiancé as well. Towards the end of this extract, you have this merging between the personal and the political. And again, this reminds me very much of A Doll's House, and it might remind you of A Doll's House too, if you studied that play. The idea being that what the couple discusses in the relative privacy of their own home is actually a reflection of a broader political situation. of course, already they've spent the whole conversation in their personal domestic sphere talking about this case and talking about Ronnie. They're not talking about their wedding. They're not talking about happiness or spending their lives together. They're talking about something which is on a more societal level, because it involves larger, powerful bodies in the country. So this final section of the extract, the green and the pink sections here, the conversation sways away from these large bodies to the personal and their engagement. And again, it shows, she asked this interrogative twice, meaning that she wants an answer. She's not afraid of his answer. He could say, no, I don't want to marry you anymore. And you get the sense that she would say, fine. You get that sense from her. At the bottom, of course, you have the irony where he's trying to bring some kind of logical stability to this conversation and to this relationship and to this campaign by saying almost, I've never wavered before. And then he corrects himself, suggesting that his stoic position here in this extract has been undermined. He's not as logical as maybe he would like to be. So perhaps Terence Rattigan there is using irony to show that John isn't as authoritative or consistent in his thoughts as maybe he would like to be seen as being. Okay, so the end of this extract, therefore, moves away from the discussion of the case specifically to their engagement. And it's the belief here, of course, is that their engagement is starting to show cracks because of the effect that this campaign is having on them and also their relationship. So very much like a mark scheme, particularly for AO5, if you've ever seen the AQA mark scheme for the questions, it's broken down into AOs. And very similar bullet points in terms of essentially the main things that students might want to talk about. So this is a summary, really, of everything we've just gone through in terms of analysing and annotating that extract. Okay, so that might also be useful in terms of what to talk about, how to get some ideas. And then your job, of course, would be then to kind of organise this into a nice paragraph plan in terms of which of these you would want to talk about in your essay. Which of these are most significant to you, for example. You wouldn't be expected to talk about them all, but what is most significant to you. And these bullet points are really a mix of assessment objectives. You've got some AO5, you've got some AO4, you've got some 3 and some AO2 as well. So it covers all of the assessment objectives. So that is the extract. So by this point in the exam, of course, you've annotated the extract in a way that you see fit, in a way that allows you to then feel more confident in terms of putting pen to paper or beginning your answer in terms of what can I actually say. So one of the main bits of advice that I always give students, whether it's my own students or students through this YouTube channel, is to make sure that they have a clear essay plan. So they know exactly what they're saying and in what order. So this is an example of a possible essay plan, and I want to stress that word possible because there are multiple ways, of course, to write an essay in English. There isn't just one way. But one of the things that the AQA insists on is the essay begins with an overview. So that should always be the same. So your first paragraph, your introduction, if you will, is designed to give the examiner an indication that you've understood what's going on, what you're seeing. And then from that, you would then go into the extract in more detail about the things you want to talk about. So I'm imagining in an hour, and I've spent maybe about 15 minutes annotating the extract. So I've got 45 minutes left to write this essay. I'm going to try and write 4 paragraphs, including the overview. After the overview, I'd want to talk about the nature of the case and who it involves. I would then want to talk about Ronnie's presentation. And I want to finish the essay by talking about Catherine and John's relationship and how the political sphere begins to affect their personal realm in terms of their engagement and obviously the setting being their home. So those are the things that I would try and talk about in my response based on this extract. So this video finishes with an example of what a good response would look like. I'm not suggesting this would get full marks, but it would get you enough to get you a good A-level. So it's perhaps worth having a look at how to write this. So the extract, an example of 20th century drama, focuses on John and Catherine discussing the alleged theft of a 5-bob postal order by a young cadet, Ronnie. Within this conversation, the audience not only understands the trivial matter of the crime amidst growing anxiety caused by civil unrest across Europe, but also how the Winslows' campaign to get to the truth is starting to have a negative impact on John and Catherine's engagement. This is an example of how the microcosm and personal world, represented by the setting of the extract being the front room of a family home, can often bear the consequences of what is happening outside the domestic sphere. Here, their marriage seems less stable because of Catherine's insistence that her brother deserves to have his democratic rights enacted. The fact that Ronnie is asleep for the entire extract means he is prevented from having a voice and defending himself, much like how the powerful institutions of the government and navy may also extinguish his right to a fair trial and freedom of speech. So that's your overview. The central issue that is causing conflict is Ronnie's alleged theft by a small amount of money from the navy. Even if this crime were true, Ronnie's age, 14, would usually excuse the trivial crime. However, in this extract, the navy has strangely pursued this, and Catherine has refused to give up and has fiercely campaigned to get to the truth. This is the reason why powerful institutions have got involved. After 2 inquiries and an appeal, the House of Commons has now got involved to debate the issue. Whereas ministers are elected to serve their constituents, the fact that the country is facing an unstable time because of a European war blowing up, as well as strikes and issues in Ireland, makes time spent debating Ronnie's alleged crime seem unwisely spent. In other words, there are more important things to discuss, and this certainly is what John believes. His irritation at how the case has gone on too long is shown through his expressions such as "my God" and repetition of interrogatives. Surely that's enough for you, and surely it can end there. Whereas Catherine may be tired, her dialogue reveals she is a woman failing to give in to societal pressure, as well as resisting John's practical mind, which suggests patriarchal logical thinking. Courageously, she is determined to make sure Ronnie makes use of his fundamental human rights and receives a fair trial and is innocent until proven guilty. The extract is structured as a conversation between 2 people. However, Ronnie, the subject of the whole conversation, is asleep, making him voiceless and unable to defend himself in John and Catherine's conversation. This may mirror the same way he is helpless in the face of powerful institutions of the media, government, navy, and judiciary, who represent a dominant force at odds with Ronnie's innocence. The fact that John says he won't mind represents how powerless Ronnie may be, both in the room and in society's eyes, and his age and naivety may not help. His innocence is reinforced when John uses the word kid. The adjacency pairs, which is a technical term for turn taken in a conversation, the adjacency pairs between John and Catherine steer the extract. Towards the end, the discourse moves from a discussion of the case to their engagement and soon-to-be marriage. Catherine's interrogative, "Do you want to marry me?" shows that she is not afraid of his answer and is being very direct, perhaps more direct than John, who speaks with a lot of pauses and who corrects himself despite saying he never wavers. The fact that Catherine asks this suggests she is giving John the choice to end the engagement because she isn't giving up her campaign, and essentially saying to him, take it or leave it. The shift in topic to their marriage makes their relationship seem less stable and shows the toll the campaign is taking on their engagement. Clearly, John is unhappy with how Ronnie's case has made the Winslow name a laughingstock, and she is also frustrated with the lack of support, his selfish focus on himself, and how he appears to other men, and patronising language to her, long noble words. As a result, the extract presents many elements of social and political protest. So that is an example there of a response following this, of course, this essay plan. Okay, so each paragraph there has a specific focus, and that's what I have shown you, starting, of course, there with the overview. And, of course, I haven't done it on this video, I've done it on other videos where I've done little ticks, perhaps mirroring the ticks that an examiner would give you in a script when they mark it, because the more ticks you have, the more marks you're going to get, essentially. So I haven't done it in this video, But every time, of course, there's a connection to language or meaning or staging or context or interpretation or connecting to the genre of political and social protest writing, you're going to get ticks. So that is an example of a response for the unseen extract response. So what I've said to students is they can often spend up to 15 to 20 minutes annotating the synopsis box and reading the extract, which is obviously very important, and then spending the remaining time of that hour talking about writing their response and talking about their what they regard to be most significant in their analysis. Okay, so hopefully that was useful. All about the Winslow Boy. Finishing off with a possible essay plan there. Good luck with your studies, and thank you very much for watching. Thank you.